Well, I'm here in Derby for a visit to a site that is synonymous with the history of Britain's railway from the very beginning. Derby, of course, was the Midland Railway's headquarters, and Derby Loco, the locomotive works, opened in 1839. This site, 1876, known originally as Derby Carriage, and now the home of Alstom in the UK. This site's been building trains for many, many years now under various ownership, British Rail Engineering Limited and all the subsequent companies to end up today with Alstom. I'm here to have a look around what's going on at the site in the wake of the brilliant news earlier in the year that a follow-on order had been let for Elizabeth Line trains for TfL. And I'm also here to speak again with Nick Crossfield, Managing Director of Alstom for UK and Ireland, who we spoke to on Green Signals previously when things were very uncertain. And now, of course, things are a lot more certain and positive, and it'll be great to see what Nick's reaction to everything is and what his outlook for the future is. So without further ado, go and meet my host for the day, and I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time at this very important and site that is synonymous with all of Britain's railway history. Two things are immediately apparent when walking around the Litchurch Lane site. First, its considerable size, and second, that at the moment at least, it's pretty quiet. And although cross-country voyages are visible around the site, they're here in warm storage. The refurbishment contract that Alstom were recently awarded does not mobilise for some time yet. The site was, however, almost silenced forever, following a period of feast and plenty of new orders for trains driven by ambitious franchise bids. Post the pandemic, the story's been the all too familiar period of famine, and this particular famine was nearly terminal. A last-minute deal to order additional trains for the hugely successful Elizabeth Line in London won the plans a reprieve. Winning the Voyager contract cemented that, and now at least the facility can look forward to a brighter future. The change in atmosphere around Litchurch Lane is dramatic as a result. I spoke first with Chloe Turnbull, a process manufacturing engineer who'd started as an apprentice. I asked her what it meant to her when she heard the news that the Litchurch Lane site had a future to look forward to. So I'm here with Chloe Turnbull at Alstom. Chloe, just tell us a little bit about your role here. What is it you do? And I know you've been here for a couple of years, so just give us a bit of your background of your time at Alstom.
So the last couple of years I've been doing an apprenticeship, so I've finished that, and I'm now currently in a PME role, which is process and manufacturing engineer role. So I support the lines, setting up hopefully some new contracts that come in, things like that.
So what are you working on at the moment?
So currently,
busy?
as we know, we've got the Crossrail order,
yeah.
And so we're doing a lot of things that are setting up ready for that for next year. That will consist of processes for building the Crossrail. Yeah. That's
okay. And so you're local to Derby, and born here, and yep. And so I suppose two things really. First of all, has it always been a kind of an ambition to work here, or was it a role that came along and you thought I'd be interested in that? What motivated you to come here in the first place?
So I was a slightly older apprentice anyway. So I started when I was 22, 23.
Yeah.
And I've always been around Derby, so I knew of the place, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go, and I absolutely love it. Since being here, all the different opportunities that I've been given, especially as being an apprentice, all different things. So I just want to stay here, and I want to make a good career for myself here.
So that period when the plant was under serious threat must have been a really difficult time. Tell us just a little bit about that. I mean, I know it's difficult, but what was going through everybody's minds at the time?
It was just really, because of how uncertain it was, obviously some people have got houses to pay for, families, so it was really concerning. For me, I was lucky that I'm not in that position, but I also have worked so hard for the last few years getting through my apprenticeship and everything, that the thought of not being here and having to start somewhere new was just really daunting. it was just a really, really worrying time. And I think I say that for other people as well. They were all feeling the same. So it's just really upsetting.
But it must have felt so really good then when the news came through that the new Elizabeth Line order had come through. There's other contracts coming through. I mean, what's the mood generally now? I suppose. How do you feel?
I'm feeling so much better about the whole situation, obviously. Knowing that I've hopefully got a future here, and I can now work towards my other goals that I have, being able to buy a property for myself, because all that sort of thing was limited because I didn't know whether I was having a job or not. So it's just really, I'm just so pleased, not just for me, for everybody. It's very different now because we've obviously lost quite a few people through the redundancies. So things are going to change, but I think it'll be for the better.
Derby Litchurch Lane has its own dedicated test track. It's a decent length too. It's just over 1 kilometre long, and trains at a test here can reach speeds of 40 miles an hour. On the day of my visit, a South Western Railway Class 701 Arterio unit was under test, and so it was vitally important, of course, to have a short ride. Whilst we were enjoying a couple of return trips on the test track, GB Rail Freight Class 69 number 69008 and Class 57 number 57305 arrived to pick up another Class 701 set to return it to its customer. It's quite a complex procedure to marshal the train for dispatch, as the two GBRF locos have to top and tail the electric multiple unit, in other words, one loco at each end of the train. And so we watched for a little while as the various shunting moves were executed. My real reason for visiting Alstom Derby, though, was to speak with Nick Crossfield. Nick has been managing director of Alstom UK and Ireland for 3.5 years. To say it's had its highs and lows would be an understatement. I last spoke to Nick in April, prior to the then government's decision to award the run-on order for the Elizabeth Line. It was a remarkable interview in which Nick was very direct and straightforward, and he graciously told me afterwards that his interview with Green Signals had played its part in helping the lobbying cause. He also offered the chance to chat again when the news had broke that the TfL order had been signed. And given that Nick is shortly to leave Alstom and is doing hardly any interviews before his departure, I knew my interview on this visit would not only be an exclusive, but also a chance to hear Nick speak candidly with his thoughts on the rolling stock sector in the UK. I'm delighted to say that Nick was as clear and direct this time as he had been when we previously spoke. Nick, it's great to be here in Derby at the Litchurch Lane works, and some months after our last conversation, and of course there's been some really positive news since then, so it's absolutely terrific. What just very quickly, I suppose, at the beginning, what did that news do for the city, but particularly the people that work here?
So as you rightly say, it's been an interesting few months. So when we met, we were in the final stages of the discussions with government on the Elizabeth Line trains potential. Two big things. The Elizabeth Line order was confirmed, and then about 2 months later, the Voyager refurbishment mandate came to Derby. Two very, very big mandates. Hugely important for the site because they secure the site's future in the short to medium term. And as we know, downstream we've got HS2, and we're now beginning to bid the next wave of rolling stock. For the city, huge relief, because Derby, as you know, has played an important role in the city for over 150 years. It's a major employer in its own right, but it's the level of activity that it supports in the city, but in the region around the city. As I said back then, for every job we have on this site, we are probably supporting 5 or 6 jobs in the supply chain. So the city does depend on that level, that activity that we deliver here in this site. So the city is very pleased. There was a huge reaction when the announcements were made. You know, local politicians, the local media, and I think it was seen as a collective achievement, because if you remember the campaign that we ran, you know, it wasn't just us in the business talking to the stakeholders and the politicians in and around Westminster. It was local councillors, local chambers of commerce, people from the local community. So, you know, a job well done and a great reward for everybody that was involved.
I mean, that community thing is really important, isn't it? I met with one of your apprentices earlier, and it was all about community. She was from Derby. This was part of the DNA of the place, really. And so, you know, one sense that community aspect was very important, not just nationally, but locally.
No, and generations, you know, as you say, we've got youngsters on site now who are starting their careers, and they're second, third generation in their families. So, you know, the continuation of what we do here, it's not just vital from a business perspective, it supports a society of people. So, you know, it's hugely important what we do here.
But it does get discussed in Westminster, in the House of Commons. It is a very political thing. Do you think, and it's always been that way, do you think that helps Derby and the works here, or has it hindered it? Or
it can be a double-edged sword, because it's always, how can I put it? It's always a very politically charged discussion. You know, we find ourselves under huge scrutiny. That can be helpful in regards the profile that you have, the employment that we generate makes us a hugely significant part of the economy. So therefore we have political relevance, political importance, which can help. Likewise, you know, what we do here and any political decisions that are part of any decision making here are therefore subject to huge scrutiny. So whatever we do here, and you know, part of the complexity of the conversations that we were having earlier in the year is that, you know, political stakeholders, whilst they were absolutely committed to helping and exploring solutions, they knew that all of those solutions would come under huge scrutiny because of, you know, the sheer nature of what we were talking about. So yes, it's helpful, but it brings with it certain costs.
One can't help but think, though, that some of that scrutiny is slightly self-inflicted by governments and administrations, because we seem to end up with this constant cycle of feast and famine. So of course nobody's that bothered when there's the feast, because it's all very busy. It's when is that anything we can ever do anything about, you think, or is it just going to be part and parcel of these kind of facilities?
So short answer to that question is we have to do something about how we plan long cycle industries. You know, this is a huge piece of investment. It's a heavy industry. The degree of the cycle of planning that we need to sort of implement to make a business like this works relies on stability in the medium and longer term. You cannot switch a facility like this on and off at a moment's notice. And, you know, back to the point I made about the length and the complexity of the supply chains we have hanging off this operation. You know, you're talking the futures of thousands of people. You're talking, you know, and if you look at sort of the components and the raw materials that we bring into this site to make these trains, there are huge lead times associated with getting those supply chains mobilized. And, you know, fundamental point, and we have this discussion with government, we had this discussion with government, we continue to have it, is we need a stable medium to long-term planning horizon. And, you know, part of the discussion that we continue to have is, going forward, how do we change that? Because when you look at rail and you look at investment in rolling stock, it's not just about rolling stock. The infrastructure upon which those trains run also needs to be invested in to take those new trains. You're talking about new trains, new technologies, different traction characteristics, all comes with associated infrastructure investment requirements. So they do need to look at how we get that long-term stability in place.
Is that a curiously British thing, Nick, that we have this feast, famine, lack of certainty, lack of consistency and that sort of pulse? Or do others have the problem? I suppose, is there anywhere that's doing it well?
Certainly in the UK, we suffer a little bit from the boom and bust more than I see in other major economies that we operate in. Closest markets to us in Europe, Germany, France, the Netherlands, they have a much greater stability in their long-term planning. And there's a key fact here, because you see it not only in the kind of volatility that people have to manage, you see it in the delivered cost of the railway. If you look at the pence per kilometre of delivering rail in, say, France or the Netherlands, there is definitely a delta between what they achieve there and what they achieve here. And it all comes down to this stability point. And it's not just stability about the planning, knowing what's there in the medium and long term. It's about, once that plan is in place, how stable is that plan? Once the plan's there, it's left alone. People have certainty in terms of what they're delivering, in what they're planning to deliver. Sometimes the observation I would make about this country is we have a lot of volatility, not just in the horizon of the plan itself, but once the plan's set, we then seem to start making changes to that plan, which is not helpful.
One of the downsides, one of the consequences of the feast period is it brought lots of investment and new entrants. And competition's good, because competition drives innovation. But do you think if we get to the point where we have that consistency and that steady rate, is there a risk that we've actually now got overcapacity in the UK?
Well, that's a facet of boom and bust, because as you say, when there's a feast on, everybody's clamouring to get in. And the problem with the boom and bust cycle, not just in rail, but in any industry, you never get a true measure of what long-term sustainable supply and demand balance is. You're always clouded by the cycle that you're currently in. And I think, we have seen in this country, as you say, a feast period where we've seen a bunch of new entrants into the marketplace who've said, on the basis of that, I think I'll have some of that. And then here we are as we go into a down cycle, and suddenly everybody's clambering around thinking, what am I going to do with this facility? And I think it's important that we do get to that stability, because that will allow not just the industrial investors in the country, but the political stakeholders that do take the long-term decisions about direction of investment in this country, to establish what is a long-term sustainable, viable capacity that we need in this country. My current view is, I think we possibly do have too much capacity right here, right now. And I would probably say that in 4 to 5 years' time, the capacity that you see on the ground today, some of that capacity will not be there. Now, clearly, our desire and our intention with a facility like this is to be here for the long term. But whilst the decisions that were made earlier this year are great for us in the short to medium term, they do not secure the long-term future of this facility. For that, we need to absolutely understand what that long-term pipeline looks like, and we need to be convinced that there is stability and real intention to bring that pipeline to market in those timescales.
So we'll probably come in a minute just to talk about how we get that, because there's been a change recently in terms of change of government, hopefully a change of approach. But let's just talk briefly about the process on the ground. Why do you think it takes so long, with so much effort, to go through the process from deciding you want to buy a new train, whoever makes that decision, through to design, through to construction, testing, commissioning, acceptance? that process feels like it takes an eternity. Is it the same elsewhere, or is it just, again, is it something we've done in this country that seems to extend that process?
So, two parts to answering that question. There's two distinct parts between somebody wanting to procure a fleet and the fleet actually entering into passenger service. The first part of that process is the bidding and the tendering, the procurement exercise. These are high value mandates, billion plus, 500 million plus, so big, big mandates. Therefore, procurement cycles are hugely detailed, hugely complex, and very, very specific in what they ask for. So, for example, when we deliver a rolling stock bid for a fleet, we have to deliver a very, very high degree of certainty in the price that we propose, because most contracts, well, pretty much all contracts now are fixed price. So we have to be absolutely convinced when we submit that number that we can deliver to that number. And in order to do that, there's a huge amount of work that goes behind that number. We have to go to our supply chain. We have to assess the capability of the supply chain to supply to that mandate. We have to assess the quantum which they are proposing for that. So procurement processes today are very involved, very detailed, quite expensive. But actually in this country, not really very different to what we see in France, what we see in Germany, what we see in Italy. So from a procurement perspective, actually, we have very little concern, yeah? Perhaps they take a little bit too long, but, by and large, we understand that environment very well. Mobilisation is another process that takes long. So once the order's signed, there is generally 18 months to 2 years before a fleet is ready for delivery and entry and passenger. Why is that? Because it takes, rough order of magnitude, nearly a year to mobilise your supply chain, start to produce the componentry, the systems, the hardware, the software that makes up that train. Now, in this country, where it gets difficult is when people start to change the specification of the train.
I was just going to ask you that very point.
We have numerous examples, and again, it's about this stability question, a mindset. In our international domains, once a fleet is specified, procured, contract signed, that's what's going to be delivered.
Yeah.
You know what you're buying, you know what you're going to the supply chain for, and it doesn't change. In this country, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, we start to change the specification and the scope of what's being asked for. There are a couple of examples that we're working on right now, high value mandates, where we're involved in those discussions. And the problem is, it's not easy to change it once it's procured, because say somebody comes to you and says, oh, I need a couple of extra doors in the side of a train. Now, most pundits on the street would think, oh, no problem. Body side, you just cut an extra couple of apertures in there. No. It changes the performance characteristics of the train, torsional rigidity, traction performance, weight distribution. And there's a huge engineering effort that goes into it. So any change to any specification comes with huge delay, huge engineering, additional cost. And it's something we do in this country in a lot of procurement processes. We see it on infrastructure as well, not just rolling stock. And I think one of the lessons the country needs to learn is not just to commit to a stable plan, but actually be incredibly consistent and stable in what you're buying.
Yeah. So you can have any colour you like as long as it's that.
That.
Yeah.
And by and large, we do get into quite extensive debates with some of our customers on some of the change requests that do come through. And is it fundamental to what the passenger is going to be wanting? Will the passenger notice? Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes there are incredibly important changes that need to be incorporated mid-mobilisation. Could be regulatory change, could be safety change, and no question, those things need to happen. But some of the discretionary changes that you see, you think, really? Do we want to turn a rolling stock programme on its head to incorporate that additional functionality or scope?
Yeah. Do you think that also the fact, and you'll probably be very diplomatic with this, but do you think the fact that certainly over the last 10 years, we've had the Department for Transport, we've had civil servants effectively clienting, being the end client for this, that a slightly perhaps risk-averse approach to things has also had an impact on process timescales and cost?
That's a big question, and it speaks to the role of government and, let's say, the administration, the civil service servants. You're right. We've seen a trend over the recent years with, let's say, the ending of some of the privatised franchise operators and those franchise operations going under greater government control. Now, government has an important role to play in, let's say, rail transportation. But government's role, and in particular the role of, let's say, the administration, the civil servants, the DfT, in my view, should be there for matters of direction, long-term investment, long-term fleet decisions. What is the traction strategy for rolling stock in the UK? Do we want 30% decarbonised or 50% decarbonised? What's our long-term aspirations? Where it becomes, if I can call it, a little more difficult is when you get big government coming right down into what I would call very, very specific operational detailed decision making. And they're not best equipped to do that. And I think, we do need to find the right balance between clearly an important role that government and people like DfT will play in the industry, but actually what do you leave to the practitioners on the ground? So people like me who manufacture trains, people like some of the operators who can operate franchises and operate passenger services, there needs to be a better balance between those two key groups.
Nick, I think you have a future assured in the United Nations, actually, with that's very diplomatic. I would probably have been less so, but I absolutely get where you're coming from. Let's just talk about Derby, the future Derby. When we last spoke, the key was, I suppose, getting an order of extra TfL trains that would at least secure the immediate future. And you were confident if that could happen, it didn't fix it for 10 years, but it provided a bridge to something. Has that bridge now been established? And the other part of that was you talked about, if it could, the Arterio platform, which is your new sort of commuter platform, would come to Derby for the group. So where are we on those two things?
So, answer question, bridge established, yes. So bridge established, which gives us, let's say, breathing room for 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Perfect, job done, objective achieved. We're delighted with that, and we're grateful for the support, from government and everybody else that was involved in that. Second part of your question, Arterio platform. Yes, it comes to Derby. So we always said, we always were very, very clear. If we had established that bridge, then Arterio would come to the UK and would be the product or the platform from which we would then bid all of our suburban opportunities going forward. That's happened. So we are now bidding Arterio. We're bidding Arterio in 2 opportunities. Firstly in the UK, southeastern, and we're just starting to mobilise on Transpennine Express. 2 very big important mandates. At the same time, the platform is now establishing the capability here in the UK, here in Derby, that will support Arterio ambitions elsewhere in the world. So we have engineers now on Derby starting to mobilise and deliver and develop that Arterio cell that will act as the central support for all of our global ADESIA ambitions.
That's terrific
It's
news.
terrific
for
news,
Derby.
terrific news. And, you know, we were very, very clear and very explicit with the Secretary of State back then about that's the prize.
Yeah.
The prize is, yeah, you get 2 or 3 years, you secure the site, but the prize is that medium long-term future and the ability for Derby and UK PLC to export.
Yeah.
Export engineering knowledge around the world. Great. However, great that we got the Elizabeth line. Great that, you know, very quickly thereafter the Voyager refurb mandate came in. But pressure's on now because, yes, we work our way through, we get through the 2 or 3 years, but now we have to deliver the second part of the bargain, which is the long-term sustainable future for this site. And 2 big levers that we have to pull. One, we have to win. We have to win those bids. We certainly have to win that major ADESIA bid, and we're putting all of our capability, all of our expertise, not just here in Derby, but from the Alstom wider world, into winning that bid. And it's a brilliant train, fantastic train. If they love Aventra, they'll love ADESIA even
And in
more.
fairness to government, they can't win that for you. You
No,
have to do that.
And that was always the conversation with government. Government said, look, guys, we can't give this to you. And we said, we know that, but bring it to market.
Yeah.
Put it in the marketplace, let us pitch it, win it, and we'll win it. We will win it. The second lever we have to pull, and we were always very clear with government about this lever as well, we have to modernise the site. We have to reconfigure and transform the site so that it is sustainable and it does give the group longevity of production here on this site. And we were very, very clear about how we need to change the size, the shape and the characteristics of this site. So we have today 6 manufacturing lines. We were very clear with government. Too much for the UK, too much can't support 6 manufacturing lines. We can see a viable future with 3, possibly 4 manufacturing lines. So we are in the process now of doing the industrial planning to take the site down to those core 3/4 manufacturing lines. We have to get the site ready for not just the ADESIA platform, which brings with it all sorts of new technologies, but, you know, some of the bigger questions like the retractioning options that we need to deploy in the UK. As we have said, we've already bid and we are already delivering hybrid trains. So decarbonised green trains, electric battery trains. We have to establish that capability in the UK so that we can bring that technology to what is a very large rolling stock market in Europe. And again, government want that because they see it as helping them to achieve their decarbonisation ambitions in general, but they also see it as another, let's say, talent and capability that can be exported from here to around the world. And we have to repurpose Derby in terms of what it does going forward. Now, historically, this site has been pure new build.
Yeah.
Everybody that works in this site is engaged and motivated by building brand new trains.
Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, don't want to look at anything else. We just want to build new, right? The market's changing. The world is changing. And I think, you know, we're all well aware, certainly since the general election, of the financial constraints that, you know, UK economies and other economies are facing. So there needs to be a different discussion. Now, Derby's long-term sustainability is not based and will not be based purely on new build. This place will, in my view, have 3 big legs upon which it needs to stand. One is, of course, new build. It will always be a premier site in the Alstom group, and it will always be the UK's premier site for new building rolling stock. Second key capability we need to deliver and develop here and we're starting it now, is the modernisation and the renewal of existing fleets. The Voyager is probably the first exploratory, but the first in a very deliberate strategic move into fleet renewal to be carried out at Derby. The new build capabilities that we have here lend themselves very, very well to the renewal of big, heavy fleets. And the mandates that you will see here in the future will be mandates like the Voyager, but probably a little more invasive, where you will see fleets brought in for big renewal exercises that will involve not just the cosmetic appearance of the train, but fundamentally changing the performance of that train through traction, new traction, new technologies, new software, new TCMS. And I think that second leg of the sort of three-leg strategy for Derby is incredibly important. Yeah. The third leg, very important, is export. This site needs to export product to have a long-term, super sustainable future. We have a great track record. We've just finished Cairo monorail. Fantastic. Delivered on time, in full, on budget. Cairo loves it, wants more, and we can give them as many as they want. But it's an example of mandates that this site will need to deliver and deliver successfully if it is to have that super future that it could have. And I think, as long as we remember that the key to a big site like this in the long term is, yes, the capability and the quality that we deliver from a site like this, but it's the flexibility and the agility to be able to move in different markets. Because, to your point, Richard, we may well get a more stable pipeline for new rolling stock, but the more markets in which we can play, the better we ourselves can manage that volatility. So if I'm going into a relatively fallow period for a new build, but I've got modernisation mandates there to play with, great. But it doesn't take away from that argument that, we need from our stakeholders and our planners much greater stability in that long-term vision.
And do you think, because you've said the word exports, you've got the politicians excited now,
Yeah.
because one of the things that's always been a challenge for all UK manufacturing for rolling stock, particularly, is the ability to win export orders. Labour have been elected into government. They have a slightly more interventionist approach on the railway, certainly when it comes to operations. Does that, I know you can't be political, but does the change of approach kind of cause you concern? You think, well, no, it's just how it is. Let's make the best of it we can.
You're right. There's a lot of discussion and debate in terms of what rail looks like in the future. We've got GBR and, what's the interface between infrastructure and rolling stock passenger operations. I don't think we'll ever be in a period where there's not some kind of debate about, how the industry should look and what optimization could be brought to bear. And I think from our perspective, as a simple, lowly manufacturer, we learn to deal with it. Now, having said that, we don't abdicate taking part in that debate, and we've been very, very clear with the politicians with whom we have, strong working relationships. Louise Haig has been here, Rachel Reeves has been here several times. We are very, very explicit and clear in what we think the industry should look like and what they need to consider in their debates that they have. Now, we can't speak for the whole industry because we're a manufacturer, and there's other big important perspectives to consider, passenger operations, ticketing, fare box, which go beyond my sort of competence. But we do feel for the first time in quite a significant period that there is a useful dialogue, and you know, we've fed into that dialogue. I think we've been listened to, and I think there is some recognition of what we are saying. And you know, in the conversations that I have today with certainly those political stakeholders, I do detect an intent to improve things. What that improvement looks like, I don't have visibility, but at least there is an intent.
And everything starts with intent.
And everything starts. And, you know, to give, let's say, some of those key stakeholders a benefit of the doubt, I mean, they're not long in those positions. Yeah, they're in kind of data gathering, forming their view. They're talking to people like me, people like you, other industry stakeholders. And, you know, but we are hopeful that, you know, and certainly given what we went through last year, and everybody was exposed to that, you know, both the government and the opposition. So they saw it firsthand, the consequences of that boom bust. And I think everybody recognised, no way do we want to continue that.
Yeah, and that's encouraging. I agree. We're coming towards the end of our discussion now. We'll wrap in a moment. I just want to ask you one very quick question, mate, just on Derby. When you're at the height of those difficult negotiations with government over Elizabeth Line follow-on order, I know you were going through a downsizing exercise. There were redundancies being made. I think they were done through voluntary processes, right? Did you end up in a position where you, perhaps fortunately, have ended up right-sized now? Or did you end up, I suppose, cutting into a bit of muscle, and now you do have to go and get some people back to be able to do these orders that you've won?
So we downsized, and we have a bit of flexibility in the workforce because we have a mix of permanent and sort of variable, which allows us to manage the kind of, let's say, warp and weft of volume moves. We were very, very consequent in the people that we retained and let go. And I don't mean, and I mean that from a skill sets perspective, not the people themselves, because we lost many good colleagues at that time, and hopefully we'll welcome them back on the site at some point in the future. But we retained within the business the key skill sets that we thought we would need for the Elizabeth Line. So, for example, in a couple of instances, we had supply chain organisations that could not continue without that commitment. But if you remember, we took a strategic decision to insource those people. So we said, okay, look, we recognise you guys can't hang on, but we think we need those 30, 40 guys, men and women, because they bring that specific capability that if we lose it, we're going to find it difficult to get back in. So in those instances, we took a strategic decision to insource them, invest in them, take them into the business. It was a gamble, it was a risk, a business
fair
risk.
Play for doing it.
A risk that we took, but it paid. So we're in the fortunate position that on the Elizabeth Line, the mobilisation is going well. And it's going well on two fronts. Firstly, from an internal perspective of the operatives and the workers that we need to actually deliver. And secondly, from mobilising the supply chain. So we signed in June, mid-June, we've already placed a significant proportion of the supply chain order load. We've already committed it. We've placed purchase orders for a significant slice of that. So not only is that good for the site that the workers understand and the workers are being mobilised, all of a sudden the supply chain out there
everywhere,
is seeing it coming down the turnpike at them. So again, they're able to invest, they're able to take the decisions they need to take. So there's a little bit. So fair play to the operational guys. It was a risk for them to do that, but it's helped us enormously.
No, it's absolutely terrific. And as I say, yeah, fair play to everybody. I suppose that sort of brings us to you. So you're shortly to leave Alstom.
I am.
When you look back on your time here, there'll have been lows and highs, I'm sure. What are sort of the memories that you will take from, being part of, Britain's genuine railway history? This place can trace its sort of roots back a long way. What will be your abiding memory?
So, firstly, you're right. I'm shortly due to leave Passengers New. So, first, I enjoyed it enormously. I mean, there's no other. Well, I'm biased, but there's no other role like this role. It's absolutely great. It's unique. My abiding memories. I think the overwhelming perception is how far it has come in 3.5 years. I mean, I remember when we completed the acquisition 4 years ago and we first came here. And if you remember, the Venture programme was half built, it was not complete, it was quite a challenging programme at that time. And we kind of looked at it and thought, oh my God, we've got to get from here to passenger service. And we were kind of thinking, yeah, there's a fair bit to be done here. But it was difficult, very, very difficult in the first sort of 6 to 9 months, just even to get your head around what we were trying to deliver and get a kind of clear path forward. Having said that, standout moments, because it doesn't matter how difficult it was and how difficult it appeared at the time, just look at the product. So all of the fleets are now in passenger service in one form or another. At the one end of the spectrum, you've got Elizabeth Line carrying in excess of 5 million passengers a week. And what a super, you go on the Elizabeth Line and you just think, this is amazing. In London, the transformational effect of that line on people's lives in the capital is enormous. And I use it. I'm a user.
Yep.
I get off at Paddington, I get it to Tottenham Court Road, and I every time I get on it, I just look at people on the train, and you can see them going, And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got, Southwest, which is these trains here, just starting to go into passenger service, first 6 trains in passenger service, just gradually feeling their way in. So stand out to get them all into passenger service and to look at the sheer quality and depth of that product is fantastic. The second standout moment is probably that deal, because 18 months ago, and you and I talked a number of occasions, I mean, we were really up against it. And, the site's future was not secured by a long way. And, we're part of an international group, and international investors take a very portfolio approach to it, and they can move money around the world. And, we had to work very, very hard to get those discussions completed. We were doing that in the backdrop of quite a challenging political situation at the time. We were moving to a general election, and there was all that volatility around us. And there were times, when we thought, God, we're not going to get this done because of what is happening around us, not because of the merits or the demerits of the deal, but just what is happening around us politically. But, huge. We all have our views on government and the administrators, but in those final crucial stages, everybody was on point. Everybody did the right thing in the right way, and enormous satisfaction at getting that deal done. it was enormously important because, you know, as we said at the beginning of this interview, what it means, not just here, but the whole region. And, you know, we all have careers of 30 to 40 years. And my view is you'll probably take 5 or 6 things, you'll look back on 40 years and there's 5 or 6 things that absolutely, and this will be probably one of them for me personally. So yeah, I've been happy to have been here at this point, at this time, and to have worked with these people. It's been brilliant.
Well, I can't think of a better way to draw to a close. It's said that if you can leave something in better condition that you found it, that's a great thing. I think you've done more than that. I know what those government deals are like. And I remember our last conversation. So it is terrific. And your legacy, Nick, and that of all of the team, is that next year at your greatest gathering event, which is terrific, by the way, and I hope you'll be coming back to that.
I will.
The world will be able to say it's still here and it has a future. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything you're about to go and do.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you for your time.
No, it's been a pleasure, Richard. Thank you. Thank you.
As a sign of the positivity that the whole Alstom UK team now clearly feel, they have announced they will be playing a very big role in the railway industry's big birthday bicentenary in 2025. I spoke with Ben Goodwin, Alstom's Communications Director UK and Ireland, about what that is and what is being planned. One of the things we've been chatting about as we've been walking around, though, is what you've got planned for next year. It's a unique event. Tell us about it and what was the inspiration for it?
So next year is Railway 200, so it's the 200th anniversary of the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And here at Alstom, we were really thinking, how can we support that? You know, we are part of the heritage, the history of the railways in the United Kingdom. For example, if you look at that first company that built locomotion number 1, the Robert Stephenson and Company, you know, the first purpose-built locomotive factory in the world, through successive mergers and acquisitions, that is now part of the Alstom estate. So we have not just not something that we'd like to do, we also have a responsibility. I was approached by a small group of very enthusiastic volunteers who really wanted to make this thing happen. And through various meetings with all people throughout the organisation, we were finally given the green light a couple of months ago to host this. And essentially, we are planning Britain's biggest rail celebration here in Derby at Litchurch Lane Works. We're going to have locomotives, we're going to have displays, exhibition materials, talks, model railways, just a whole cavalcade of events and activities to inspire and for people to enjoy over 3 days. So it's the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of August next year. And we just want to bring back some of the locomotives and some of the, you know, the rolling stock that was built here in Derby. That's one of our big ambitions. I'd love to get a lineup of adventures, but some of that real old heritage rolling stock, steam, diesel, electric that was built here, not just here in Derby and not just by Alstom and legacy Alstom companies, by, you know, across the board, and have that a real cavalcade, a real celebration of what is great about this country, what is great about our railways. So sort of looking back, but at the same time looking forward to what's coming, because, you know, we all know HS2, part of the HS2 trains are going to be built here as well. So there's lots more to look forward to as well.
Derby Carriage has been building rolling stock since 1876, 148 years. Next year, it will play a leading role in Rail 200, a wonderful celebration of the extraordinary contribution the railways have made and continue to make to our economy and society. Then, Litchurch Lane will celebrate its own 150th anniversary. For a while earlier this year, it looked unlikely that those two celebrations would be taking place here, but now they are secure. With the future headquarters of Great British Railways also to be located in the city of Derby, the city and the wider region is set to play a major role in the UK rail sector for many years to come.